The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. King of Iowa. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to implement, administer, or enforce the prevailing wage requirements of Subchapter 4 of Title 31 of Title 40 United States Code.
Pursuant to House Resolution 641, the gentleman from Iowa and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, this is the amendment that strikes the funds that might be used to enforce the Davis-Bacon wage scale. That's a piece of legislation that passed here in this Congress sometime about 1931. It was designed to, I'll say, keep African Americans out of the labor force in New York as they were building federal buildings. It's a remnant of the Jim Crow law. In fact, it's the only remnant that remains, as near as I believe, of the Jim Crow laws. And so it comes down to this. When you have a relationship between two people and they agree to a wage scale, that's all that should be required here. Instead, this federal minimum wage scale sets a union scale. It's not prevailing wage, it's union scale. I have dealt with Davis-Bacon wage scales all of my business life. I started a construction company in 1975. We almost immediately had to deal with the federal government coming in and saying, on this side of the road you shall pay your shovel operator this, and on the other side of the road you shall pay him something that might be half again more than that. And the guy that runs the grease gun gets this, and the one that runs the excavator gets that. The federal government micromanaging and disrupting the efficiencies in our construction companies results in far higher costs for our construction projects. Now, we have maintained a series of records over the years, and what it costs additional when we're doing Davis-Bacon federally mandated union scale jobs, and it runs between 8 and 35% in our company over these years. There's other data out there that's done. Beacon Hill has some that shows a range. In the end, it boils down to a net effect of a 20% additional cost for Davis-Bacon wage scale. Now, here we are we're bleeding red ink in the federal government, and CBO made a recommendation if we wanted to move towards balance, the repeal of the Davis-Bacon Act would be one of those things that would help us move in that direction. But on this bill itself, it appropriates $5,493,000 for civil works programs. All of that would fall under the Davis-Bacon mandated wage scale. And on Title II, the Department of the Interior Bureau of Reclamation appropriates $1,014,000,000. So the total in this bill is $6.507 billion. And if my amendment is enacted into law, we're going to see a savings in this bill of $1.3 billion. Mr. Chairman, no one can claim to be a fiscal conservative if they think the federal government needs to inflate the cost of wages. Supply and demand sets the cost of those wages. A reasonable pay scale is arrived at. I mean, I'm hearing people say we must bring in tens of millions of people to do a work Americans won't do and pay them a mandated union scale. And this is not settled by the prevailing wage. Somebody will get up and say, no, it's a prevailing wage. They take a survey from contractors and find out what the prevailing wage is. Then they work that out, and a board makes a determination on what is actually the prevailing wage. It's simply not true in practice, Mr. Chairman. It's not true in practice. In practice, yeah, some advisors sit down. They decide whether people in different categories ought to have more money next year or not. It's an arbitrary, subjective decision. It's not prevailing wage. I know this law. I've been with this for a long time. I know that it costs taxpayers a lot of money, and I don't think that there's any way to actually find out how hard this number is that I tell you is 8 to 35%. The Beacon Hill has a different number of around 5 to 38. Mine's 8 to 35. I think theirs is 5 to 38%, but it averages out to about 20%, and that does not include the inefficiencies that are wired into this. The inefficiencies come when you have labor that is competing for the highest paying jobs and doing sometimes the most inefficient thing with the most inefficient machine because it pays the most money. It is a Jim Crow law. It needs to be eradicated. It was designed to lock African Americans out of the construction, particularly in New York. Now it's a holy grail for union wages. I used to say for the gentleman in Massachusetts who was here at the time, and he would say anytime there's a relationship between two or more consenting adults, the federal government should not stick their nose into it. And I would say I agree with that. And there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to climb in my son's excavator and let him pay me $10 an hour or whatever we agree to, or 15 or 20, not the mandated wage scale. So I urge adoption of my amendment that would eliminate the enforcement of Davis-Bacon wage scale on this bill, and I yield